Welcome to the COVID-19 breakout session. So as we all know, COVID-19 has had quite a havoc on the travel and tourism industry. So many destinations are still impacted from that, and we're thankful to be here, but some countries aren't able to travel at all. So this is a really important topic. We got 4 speakers. I'd say try to keep your talk to about 15 minutes, and then we'll have 5 minutes of questions right afterwards. And if we have more time, we can even have a dialogue. So I'm sure many of these presentations relate to each other. We can maybe even learn something together as we go through these. So first we have Becky. So how you pronounce your last name? Liu-Lastres from Indiana University-Purdue. And the title of her presentation is Vaccinated to Travel, a multi-group analysis of travel propensity and current protective behaviors. So come on up, Becky.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our presentation, Vaccinated to Travel, a multi-group analysis of travel propensity and current protective behavior. This is a project done by me and Dr. Cahyanto, which is based in the University of Louisiana. Okay, probably not working. So just a little bit background information. We have lived with COVID for almost 3 years now. Starting from the very beginning, we're kind of like scared now of knowing what to do, and to an extent that we kind of like getting familiar with it. But in between, when we were super desperate, we were really trying to grasp anything that we can help until the vaccine come out. Everybody think, oh, that's gonna be a solution to all problems. We're gonna be like right back to travel. Everything's gonna be back together. And destinations have incorporated like a vaccine request. They have the COVID passport system. They think like if everybody is vaccinated, we're gonna be like 100% safe, and we're gonna be like the perfect case of everything. So for example, New York is the major city that introduced COVID vaccine passport. If you go to a restaurant, go to a gym, go to anywhere, just present your passport. So they think this is the best way that can help the destination to be safe, can give people confidence to travel again. So the very interesting about United States that even though we think vaccine could be the solution to the problem, it's a very controversial issue. A lot of people don't want to take vaccine. It's a very hotly contested, and we don't know why. And even though they have a lot like promotion and things like that, it's like probably like half a population were not vaccinated, not for health reason, but just for personal concerns. So some people even was thinking, will travel be a good motivator or trigger for people to take vaccination? Besides, so when we're looking at how people make decisions in uncertainty times, in crisis times, we use the potential motivation theory a lot. Also, a lot of studies of this studies that based on the PMT actually can look at homogeneous samples, so they just put everything together. So they probably ask your vaccination status, but just probably one of the variable that they just include. And so when we're missing a lot of information, a lot of details, it may lead to biased results. And the second thing is during the whole process, mass communication, like mass media, definitely having an impact on how people think, perceive, things like that. So based on all the things, what we want to know is that if we use people's current behavior, like the current protected behavior, and we look at their travel propensity, how likely they would like to travel domestically, internationally, would that give us additional insight to understand why these people, or would these people be vaccinated to travel? Would travel become a new motivator to promote travel health behavior? So that's how we bring in this additional approach to there. Therefore, using the PMT, using the mass media, travel anxiety, this kind of variables that have been well studied, we added another element by breaking down their groups and to see how those may affect their relationship. So we have 4 research questions. Traditionally, we always ask how do some key factors like PMT, media coverage affect people's intention to take a COVID vaccine as a precondition of travel. But based on that, we have 3 follow-up questions. Will there be any difference in the effects based on the domestic travel propensity, international travel propensity, and also the current adopted protective behavior? So this is the conceptual framework of the PMT. So basically, it just says that once you have the information, it goes to 2 phrases. One is the threat appraisal. You look at the severity, susceptibility, and what you may gain for taking the risk. And then it's the coping appraisal, it's like a self-efficacy, how effective they are, the response efficacy, and what it may cost for you to undertake this behavior. And then it goes to motivation, intention, actions. And then in the middle, during the process, media affects it. And also we add another affective dimension on travel anxiety, because this is more like rational, you're weighting the risk and benefits, but in the same time, you probably sometimes get anxious, then the affective feelings sometimes override the process as well. So we developed 11 hypotheses based on that. So as you see, based on the key variables, we'll build a conceptual model. They're looking at how media coverage affects the threat and efficacy, and then the efficacy breaking down into like self and vaccine, and then the cost and how they're likely to compliant, and then we're adding travel anxiety in there as well. So one thing is that even though in the theory we have reward and cost, but in reality a lot of times, because it's like the two sides of story. So here we're just looking at the cost instead of looking at both. So methodology, we get all the items from the literature, and how we identify the groups. We use a series of questions. So first we ask them if they engage in any protective behavior towards COVID. There are like 5 sentences, things like I never do anything to protect myself against COVID, and to like wear mask, social distancing, washing hands. So based on that, we identify 2 groups: those who are low, they might never do anything, might do 1, versus those who like 3 or 5, like do most of it. This is the first criteria. And then we ask them how likely they may travel in the next 3 months, domestically and internationally. And based on their response, we further divide them into like domestic travel group and international travel group, is like how likely they would travel. And then we collected, we use the online survey. We actually have 2 waves of data. And in late May and early August of 2021, that was I think that was the time that some people are taking vaccine, some people are not, but vaccine was available to all people, all of the United States people, but they just like still a lot of debate. And that was a very sensitive time. If you like university have the COVID passport, people like it, people hate it. It's like very controversial. And then the respondents will ask if they have taken vaccine or not, or if have taken at least 1 dose of the vaccine. And we here in this study, we only use a subsample of those who are not vaccinated. And when we do the data collection, we do mirror our census data based on age, gender, education, and income. So this is like a true reflection try to be a true reflection. But for the analysis, we just look at the people who are not vaccinated, like not at all, did not receive any dose. Then we use a PLS, and we, in addition to do the path analysis, we do a multi-group analysis, and then based on the 3 criteria I said just before. And this is our respondent profiles. We have a good split between female and male, and most of them are relatively young, between 25 to 49 years old, and around a third of them are Republicans. Then we have a majority of white people, and interestingly, a lot of them are just like a little bit less than half of them are from high school graduates, and some of them have like college experiences but no degrees. So this is a reflection of the characteristics. I know it's very interesting. We were reviewing the sample profile. It's like really kind of match like a stereotype of what we are thinking. So that's very interesting of the respondent profiles. And look at the measurement model. We did look at the loadings, look at their compass alpha value. So everything looks good. AVE 0.5 HTM. So this is like a legit model. This is a good look, quick look of the measurement, the items that we have. We have like the media coverage. We're trying to really focus on the positive side of the vaccine. And then we have the threat. The threat is capturing both the severity and susceptibility. And then with the anxiety is a Simonton scale. And then with the vaccine efficacy, vaccine self-efficacy, vaccine cost, and compliance. And then the structural model looks good. The SR-MR value fits, and the overall R value above 0.7 indicate a very good level of explanatory power. And then we used 100 sample size of 100 for bootstrapping analysis. So this is the hypothesis. The model testing result is a little bit blurry, so I kind of like just summarize on the side. So as you see, the media coverage affects the threat, affects the vaccine efficacy, affects how people perceive the vaccine cost, and threat affects people's anxiety. And there's like a small correlation between the threat and vaccine efficacy as well. And threat also affects the compliance, vaccine efficacy, compliance, and travel anxiety of compliance. So basically, when you're looking at this, you will find some very interesting thing is in the past, we're looking at self-efficacy a lot, which is a key variable, drives people's engagement in protective shrimp behavior. But this one is not even like significant. And also, before we will see there's a cost related to the compliance because they think there's like consume their time, the side effect, that's another thing that drive them away from engaging in certain behavior. But in this model, it was not significant either, which is very interesting. So a lot of things you expect to see in general samples is not really appearing significant in this model. So we're very curious. So we do a little bit, go a little bit deeper. So if you see the left side is the path that's significant in the general model. And then the first one, we're looking at the one that with who are already engaged in the high and low protective behavior. So I want to bring your attention to certain things. The first one is the relationship between anxiety and efficacy. It's actually more significant in the low current protective behavior, like people who didn't do much to protect themselves against COVID anyway. So there's like a small relationship with them. Then another one is the anxiety and compliance. That's for those people who are already engaged in a lot of protective behavior. The more anxious they feel regarding traveling now, actually makes them less likely to take a COVID vaccine, which is very interesting because you always expect it will be the opposite. And lastly, we see the vaccine cost and compliance. That's also very interesting. It's among those who already engage in certain protective behavior, things that the cost will drive them away for taking the vaccine for travel. So this is like a quick snap just based on the current behavior. So then we look at how likely they're gonna travel domestically, and some very interesting finding occurs as well. So the video coverage actually affect their perceive of the cost, but only for those who have very low interest in travel domestically. And also travel anxiety and compliance, they have like a negative impact, but only significant in those who have very low travel propensity. And then the vaccination cost and the compliance as well. Remember the previous one, it was among those who are highly adopted group, but here is for the low domestic group. So those who did not want to travel domestically anyway, they do think the cost is a negative impact of their behaviors. And then it goes to the international travel and things getting even more interesting because most of the things looks the same except the relationship between the video coverage and the vaccine costs and the travel anxiety and compliance. That's only apparent in the low international group, and so does the vaccination costs and compliance. They only become significant in the low international group. So even though some of this path are significant in the general model, they appear to be a little bit different when we break it down into groups. Another thing is some of the path is not significant in the overall model, but when you break down into groups, they were like become significant based on like certain groups, based on their protective behaviors and their interests. So based on that, we have some small recommendation. So first one is that when we look at PMT media coverage, although these variables are very well studied, when you break it down by the group, when you break down the big sample into small samples, you will see the relations and the impacts actually varied. And so we do think that more advanced and more in-depth analysis are needed, and also maybe comply with some qualitative data to really understand what are people's real concerns, because some of these relationships are very different from what we expected and what we thought it would be. So when same thing when coming into practice, so at this point we think that vaccine and travel comes in hand, but in reality it looks like one size fits all approach is not always applicable, not only in this case, but also in like the other travel health behavior questions as well. And we do recommend more in-depth and customized approach that to identify the barrier constraints that based on the specific type of group people. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. We've got time for about maybe 5 minutes of questions. Questions to get started?
Do you have a question?
I got a question.
Okay.
Compliance was like your dependent variable. What do you mean by compliance?
Like they will take a vaccine to travel.
Okay. This group, was 50% did not have a college degree, more or less. Did you look at their like previous travel history, like how much they traveled before the pandemic?
We do. We didn't include it here, but we do have that variable there. I'll definitely go back and look at it, but I don't think they travel a lot. That's what my
I was
suspicion
thinking
too.
international, like I don't know how many of them had actually previously taken an international trip.
Yeah, that too. And we didn't have we have the location data, but it would be interesting also see where they're from as well.
That's an important point because it might be, a group that doesn't travel anyway.
Yeah.
So how worth is it, marketing?
I'm also just thinking, if this was taken in July,
Mm-hmm.
this is a pretty resistant group to begin, like a high level of resistance to the vaccine probably to begin with, right?
Yeah, that's what we're thinking.
So do you have the means, like when you go back to like, you have the regression coefficients, but like what kind of mean scores were you getting on like media, puts vaccine in a positive light? Like
That's our items kind of like featuring too. It's like the media trying to portray a positive image of COVID, of vaccine, but it doesn't seem to affect those people much.
Like what kind of mean score on a 1 to 5 scale?
Yeah, it's 1 to 5. I don't know. I don't have that on top of my head, but I'll definitely go back and check.
I guess it depends on what type of media. Did you see what type of media?
We have TV and we mostly focus on mass media, like TV and I think that's newspapers and things like that. I think we have an information source question too for them. Like ask them. It's like this is like a bigger project, and we just took out the unvaccinated people.
You should pay attention to the other types of media.
Yeah.
Like news apps heavily coming from YouTube. And those old people and those not educated people, they pay attention to YouTube that's been watching the all the time. And it's very hard to change their attitude perception because you notice that in the beginning of this vaccination in the States, they always use vaccinated, you will be controlled by this
Yeah.
kind of stupid thing. But still there's a people believe that. And even some of my friends, they only receive the second two because even two was just minimum number of vaccines, but they don't want to get a booster because it's not required to travel to other countries. So then you need to ask about what media type actually affects most about this particular perception toward vaccination. Then may bring something new inside.
I think that's good insight. We have one ask them like what are the common information source they have, and we definitely should put that like back into the picture.
Do you want to applaud you for the multi-group factor analysis? Like, it's really beneficial to separate groups out and kind of see these structural relationships and how they change. It's a lot of work statistically on that.
Ignatius can take care of that, but you say, yeah, I'll definitely look at.
It's really a good thing, and it adds a little extra rigor than just saying, "Oh, this is what happens for everybody." That kind of thing.
The multi-group factor analysis, got it. All right.
Anything else?
No, good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, nice. I guess you got the microphone here. So next we have Dr. Mark Holmes from the University of Guelph. He'll be speaking to us about learning from the past to prepare for the future, similarities and differences between COVID and SARS for the hotel industry in Canada. So, or here's Mark.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for having us today. My presentation is looking at what the differences were between SARS when it happened in around 2002, 2004, and then where we are today with COVID, and what lessons we didn't learn then that we should have to prepare for now. And so there was three of us that actually worked on this. The whole paper came about because one of the top 19th century hotel historians that we have in the world is Kevin James. And he was interested in looking at maybe, how do we relate this to current practices and what's going on today? And so it was really a nice blend between the history department at the University of Guelph and the Hospitality and Tourism Business School, which is rare to kind of see that nice connection. So it was great. Jose Alonzo was, this was one of his MRP major topics that he was looking at for Kevin. And so while I'm giving a great overview of kind of what we found in general, he has very specifics on every single paper he looked at and how it broke down. And so I'm really going high level with this presentation today. So context. So prior to COVID, tourism was doing very well for us. And then COVID hit. And tourism went down really fast. Occupancy rates low of 10%, high rates of layoffs. And remember, this isn't 2020. This is right as COVID hit. We did it that summer. So the 4 months after COVID's happening. So to see drop down to 10, 20% was huge for our industry. Hotel closures, 4,100 closures in Canada as of April 2nd, 2021. So understanding, the purpose of this was to understand how COVID-19 differed from SARS and to derive lessons that we can learn from both then and now to make ourselves a little more future-proof as an industry. So discussion topics, method, key differences, occupancy rates, tourism sector profiles or focus, workforce, geopolitical environment, localization, safe travel, mitigation, recovery, and then recommendations. So really, these are the differences that came out of that gray literature search. Now, I have to explain a little bit in the methodology here when we come here, is that this is a bit different than the normal tourism papers I've written in the past. I'm used to, here's the huge literature review and the methodology and how we go through it and building it out. And I sat down with Kevin and he said, in history, our method is to look at gray literature. I said, well, okay, so what theoretical underpinning? He goes, no. We look at the history and we write the story. And I kind of went, this is not what I know. This is very different research. And I said, to me, that's a literature review. He goes, well, no, because I'm not looking at the academic articles. I'm looking at so they were, newspapers from 2002, 2004. There's many online, but there's also a few you can't get to. And so they were going to archives to pull up the newspapers, do the analysis. So it was wonderful for me to really get to learn a different type of system. And so what I said to him was, this is wonderful, and we can get that great, rich data from the history. But if we want to look at current, newspapers are great, but let's talk to people. Let's go out and interview some hoteliers and see how their experience back in SARS compares to their experience now. So we did. We actually partnered up with ORMA, the Ontario Restaurant Hotel Motel Association, and got them to reach out to 12 people in the industry to see kind of what they thought and what their experiences were. And from those 12, we were able to get 5 people who actually did interviews with us. Interesting enough, the first person I sat down talking to them, really what the gray literature was saying is what they were finding. Second person, same thing. Third person, same thing. Fourth person, I'm going, okay, I'm hearing the same thing over and over again. We got to the 5th person and the story's not changing. What was being said in the media, what was being said on the news was exactly what was happening in the industry. And so we stopped at that 5th and didn't go further because we kind of went, you know what, it's telling us our story, but giving us enough to support what the literature is saying. And that's where the methodology came. It's a little different than I'm used to writing, but it was a lot of fun to go through. So our key findings, occupancy rates, both events seen huge drops. The difference was in COVID-19, 80% drop in hotel occupancy, March, April 2020. In SARS, it was the 36.5% drop year over year. So not as big of an impact. The other thing we had is that there was a very different focus. So tourism sector focus, both events impacted tourism to a huge extent. Now, with SARS, hotels are regarded as a central of viral transmission, and they were even used at one point as a place to measure how bad SARS was getting, which is kind of different than what we've seen now. I mean, hotels became the vector for disease spread, and occupancy rates were actually used as an index to look at how much impact it was having on the industry and on the communities. In COVID, it was just immediate and lasting impacts. It was global, it was across the world, everyone was getting hit, and you really weren't using the hotels as the indicator because they didn't have people staying at them. And so it was a very different situation. And that's the worst slide you're gonna see for text. Now, Keith, so the other thing, workforce, and we've had discussion through all of our conversations over the past 3 days, the workforce has been hit huge. But even in SARS, we've seen the hospitality workforce hit. 12,000 hospitality workers lost their jobs and employment in the city in April 2003. That's just in Toronto. So that should have been a sign that if we get this large scale event again, we're going to have a big problem. But again, we're kind of, we'll get to kind of what the industry was thinking and saying when we get to the end here. Geopolitical environment, very different. SARS was hit when travel was already being depressed. We had Middle East conflict, and so documentation requirements were higher. People didn't want to travel as much, and because there was more things they had to go through. With COVID, everyone was traveling, and all of a sudden it just came to a stop. Localization. Now, this is one of the biggest impacts and biggest differences we've seen between SARS and COVID. First, SARS was localized, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Toronto. These are the 3 areas that it hit. And so really when you're looking at spread, it was really contained. And the interviews actually tell us that it's not even Ontario, it was Toronto. Places outside of Ontario outside of Toronto really didn't even see an impact. And so I talked to people that were working at the time, and the interviews kind of said, if you were in Toronto, you shut down, or the hotel was hugely impacted. And I talked to other people and I said, well, where were you working? They said, I was working in Vaughan. And Vaughan is just kind of outskirts of Toronto. And I said, well, it didn't impact me. What do you mean it didn't impact you? I wasn't in Toronto. And so a huge difference in this perception of how much impact it had on a specific destination. COVID, we know it's a global pandemic, right? It wasn't localized. There wasn't one state, one province, one area, one country. It was across the world. And so big differences there. Safe to travel. So SARS, Toronto was declared safe from SARS after 3 months. Everyone was back to traveling again. You can go back to Toronto again. It was okay. COVID, we're still kind of in that position that, some countries are safe, but, safe to travel is really not a term we're saying. We're just saying, well, we've gotten rid of the mandates for you to wear a mask anymore. So it's a bit of a different perception on what is safe to travel, right? We're all sitting in this room. COVID's not gone, but there's a different perception of, now we can deal with it through vaccines and how we're working. Mitigation focus. So SARS mitigation was a bit different. Again, we've seen that it was a very localized experience. And so in Toronto, the businesses came together to create a coordinated response. They went to the government, and the government put in programs in order to try and help with the situation. They actually tried to lower gas prices as part of that process. The provincial government's committed to funding advertising for local and Ontario travel to get it back up and running. And then there was a large publicly incentivized event where people could go and watch these top performers from around the world come to Toronto. And it was really, it was to get Toronto back on the map and to show everyone that SARS was over. Toronto was back. We're good, right? And so, AC/DC, Justin Timberlake, although that was a bit controversial when it came out, and Rush. And so you had all these big bands coming that drew people back to Toronto. Would we do that today? Packing hundreds of thousands of people into a small area to try and get people back to Toronto? Not the smartest idea, because we're not really through it yet. And then with COVID, well, it's a large economic focus. So it wasn't, let's try and help the tourism sector. Let's get tourism back. Let's create that economic driver again. It's everyone's hit. We have to help the restaurants, the hotels, the market, the manufacturing sector. Every sector was hit. And so the focus became more on employment and less on a specific industry as a focus. So recovery. Pre-SARS occupancy rates actually recovered by 2004. And so you've seen there that, it was really 3 months that the WHO had a, don't travel. Once that was ended, about a year later, we started to see, pre-SARS numbers come back. When we're thinking of where we are now remember that when I'm looking at this information, it was in 2020 when we were actually doing interviews and looking at the gray literature. No one knew when we were going to be out of COVID and when it was going to come back. And even now, we're not sure when that time will be. There's a projection that 2023 will start to see pre-COVID numbers again. But I mean, talking to people at the conference, 80% occupancy in some of these hotels. So it could even be sooner than that, but no one knows when that's going to happen. So lessons. The interviews of the 5 industry personnel really showed us that hoteliers outside Toronto proposed that SARS had no impact. They didn't see a drop in occupancy. They didn't see a change in the way they did things. Everything is normal because they weren't in Toronto. But if you were in Toronto, you had a huge different perception. People didn't go to Toronto. They didn't stay in Toronto. They wouldn't stay in a Toronto hotel, but they still might fly into somewhere outside of Toronto, but they wouldn't fly into Toronto anymore. So Toronto was that area of viral transmission. Hotelier Toronto stated that they made improvements to their sanitation and emergency procedures, but that otherwise it was just an idea of waiting out SARS. And so I followed up a question. I said, so when you did all those safety procedures and the sanitation protocols and everything else, did you create a manual that if this ever happened again, you institute it? Well, no, we just needed to get through it. And I kind of went, oh, wait, that makes no sense. I mean, you had the policies, the procedures, and the programs in place. Yeah, but we just had to get through it. So it was a very different situation. COVID, you can't do that. It's here. We have to deal with it. So every organization had to develop those policies, programs, procedures, so that if this ever happens again, they have those manuals, they have the books, they have the understanding of what they need to do differently. So hotels should have seen SARS as an opportunity for us to learn from what happened. Toronto was a very localized event, but if we had to learn from that localized event and then taken what we learned, created policies and programs, procedures, even the large hotels, large chains were in Toronto. If they had created those procedures and policies, made them available to all their other properties when this hit, they would have had knowledge about how to handle something like this, at least at a cursory level. But we had nothing because we didn't plan for this. So, sanitation protocols, emergency planning, strategic revenue management tactics. And we'll talk a little bit what these are and what the industry was talking about. So current climate. Before COVID-19 hit, tourism spending projected to climb to $293 billion by 2030. Projections have been turned on their heads. Who knows when that's going to happen, if it'll happen. Hotels, motels, restaurants experiencing historically low occupancy rates and unprecedented layoffs. Hoteliers not sure where the industry is going. We're going to go over the next few months. And so again, this was in 2020. So seeing where we've gone, I mean, a lot of them, when I asked them, do you think that we're going to come out of this? And they went, well, we'll come out of it. I said, is it going to be the same or is it going to be different? And a lot of them were, well, we won't be in the same position. There was one that said, when this is over, we'll forget about it. We'll go back to doing the exact same thing we did before because that's what we do. And I kind of thought, well, that was interesting to hear that perception. So unlike 2003, where there was a widespread expectation that post-SARS hotels would recover, there's not a consensus on whether that's going to happen. Is every hotel going to come out of it? Are we going to have a different policy coming out? And then are these policies and programs for sanitation going to maintain in the hotels? And the hotels I was talking to were saying, we're going to keep some of them, but many of them are too expensive to continue on with all the time. And if we do, then our costs are going to have to go up. And it won't be the employees and the companies that eat that, that'll be the people that stay with them. And so that causes a challenge for a hotel trying to maintain a certain level of ADR and occupancy percentage. So even though the industry is rebounded from COVID, lack of a qualified labor force is exacerbating the issue of staffing identified pre-COVID. We knew there's a staffing shortage. Well, it's just gotten worse because we laid everyone off and said, well, hey, it's over, come on back. And they're all going, no, because it's gonna, if it happens again, we're gonna be the same position, right? I mean, the discussion is that hospitality and tourism workforce is almost recession proof because when, recessions hit, people still travel a little bit or people still eat out at hotels and that happens, but we're not large scale pandemic proof. So when something like a large scale health impact happens, we don't have the ability to maintain or manage that well. So where do we go from here? And these come from the discussion with the industry and from the great literature we were reading about where do we go. And really the four things that came out were one, educate. So educate the hotelier about how to manage the properties properly. Educate the people, the community about how the hotels are doing this. What policies and procedures are they putting in place to make it safer for you to travel to the hotels and to the destinations themselves. Second was manage revenues. And this became very important because all of a sudden the P&L report changed every day. And so understanding your P&L very well, understanding revenue management, understanding how to manage revenues became important. With that also became the responsibility for organizations to start looking for people that they could cross-train and that knew many different things and could manage many different pieces within an operation and do it. And so managing revenues became the focus from everything else. So sanitation, you had to have all that in place to bring people in the door, but that managing the revenues kept the door open. And so it became a very key tactic. Collaborate. Now there was two types of collaboration. One was collaboration within the industry because the industry had to come together to bring people back to the destination and to really drive people to the hotels again. But then there was collaboration within the hotels. Many of the hoteliers were talking about the fact that the parent chain companies had ideas about what the targets needed to be. But the hoteliers that were actually running the hotels went, you're giving us targets that are based on nothing. There was no research around what this target was. You want a 20% occupancy rate. That's great. We're in COVID. We don't even know if we're going to get 10% this week. And so targets, management teams needed to work with the actual people on the ground to develop better relationships to make their operations run more effectively. And then lastly, develop contingency plans. What happens when something like this happens? Put them in place so that if this happens again, we know what to do. There's a step-by-step process. And because that didn't exist. And if we had learned from SARS, we would have been better prepared for COVID. Not that it was the same, but there were certain policies and procedures that could have been done instantaneously that hotels could have used to attract people and retain them. If they said, I understand, this has hit, we've now instituted these sanitation policies. For some hotels, that was 4 months, 5 months down the road after we actually clarified that we had COVID. Well, that could have been done instantaneously. And so not losing as many customers, or at least a perception that there was already movement being done in our industry to keep people. So with this research, the results are very dated now. 2020 is when it happened. The benefit of that, though, is that we really have this picture of what people were thinking at the beginning of 2020 and what the literature was saying in 2020 when COVID really came about. And so future research could look at how has this changed? And how are some of the things that we looked at when they said, oh, we're not going to rebound, or we won't rebound the same, or we'll be a different industry? Has that held true? And so future research can look into that. And then interviews were also limited to 5 interviewees. I mean, it's always better to have more. I mean, typically that saturation level is 12 to 15. I had 5. And the reason why 5 seemed to be okay for this is because the gray literature was also supporting everything I was hearing from the interviewees. There was no differences between them. And so we hit the 5, and that's as many as we had. And so it was really to inform our gray literature search and to see what we found out from there. Questions? Yeah.
You have mainly focused on
Yes.
I came to Canada
Yep.
when I was studying. All my friends, my mom and dad, all were there.
That's right. Yep.
Because in CNN, every hour,
Oh yeah.
people dying
In Toronto.
and everyone is wearing that.
Yep.
When I landed at the Pearson airport, no one was wearing a mask. And I didn't hear anything about the SARS.
Wow. Okay.
And then, so to recover from 2003, especially for international education, it
Yep.
took about 16 years. So by 2019, we got back to the 2002 level.
Okay.
It took about 16 years. Not the domestic tourism. That's why what they said that they didn't have much impact.
Yeah.
Domestic tourism was recovered very quickly.
Right.
Because it was regional, very time frame and stuff.
Yep.
But if you look at the other country, our major target markets, the media.
Yep.
For instance, Japan and Taiwan, their visitation dropped by 50%.
Mhm.
And very couple of weeks and stay there. But Korea is kind of some point up. They saw this as an opportunity, like to Canada, so they actually sent us some chocolate, like the Committee Rocky.
Okay.
Committee Rocky were not impacted by that.
Yep.
But we lost this American vegetation.
Yeah.
Very
That's right.
lovely market baby boomers.
Yep.
So they are less likely coming up to the Muskoka area for a long time.
Yep.
So we lost many of them for a long time. So if you can maybe look at this, some of the newspaper or major media in our target market can compare it, how they are thinking about this SARS. Because global pandemic is, we all experienced it.
Yes, that's right.
So it may be a big difference. That's why we are coming and recovering that back very quickly, because this is not only my problem, it's everyone's problem.
Yeah.
Now Canada is the US better open with less restrictions, so we just go there. They're on travel within the country. So that's kind of different. But SARS is maybe every country's view and their media attention content may be very different.
Oh, very much. I agree. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. I mean, often travel and tourism is the first to be hit.
Yes.
The last to come out. And yesterday we heard back to normal
Yeah.
2025.
Yeah.
I'm hearing now. So 2023, 2024, 2025. You mentioned the government support programs
Yeah.
for the businesses. Businesses, not necessarily travel and tourism.
Yep.
We had the same thing in Australia. We had our JobKeeper scheme for businesses. But now, as we're sort of coming out of that, we've actually got our states and territories providing packages for tourism
Right.
specifically.
Yep.
So what's the case here? Is it support for businesses, or is that been and gone? And what's the travel and tourism industry doing? Being supported by government?
So it's a bit different. Initially, it was support for the workforce and not tourism specific. In 2021, the government put out a tourism specific call for proposals to support specific organizations that applied for grants that could help. And then there was also small business loans that they paid back a certain amount of. So it was a coordinated approach, but it wasn't. There was, besides there was 2 rounds of the calls for the tourism specific funding. Besides those 2 calls, it was really a general funding across the board for businesses. And so there was also a worker relief program where businesses could apply to have part of the wages supplemented so that they kept the employees on. So it was yeah.
Question in the chat.
Yeah.
Question that says, these interventions can be costly if global health crises are at least up until now sporadic and unpredictable. Which of these actions should be ongoing ongoing during normal times, and which should be enacted as soon as reports of an impending crisis?
That's a good call. I mean, so collaboration is something that should be happening all the time. It shouldn't be something that is separate, that happens only when a large crisis hits. And so that should just be, it's always a challenge, management talking to ownership and trying to get on the same board. That's one. The other one of looking at having those policies in place for future proofing, that's really taking all the manuals, procedures, and policies we've developed now and writing them down somewhere. Have them in some sort of written format or in a video, or have it documented so that if this happens again, you pull it out. Here's the manual, here's the process, here's what we do. And that's not an ongoing cost. They've done it already. We've done that now. Just document what you're doing, have it somewhere so that if it happens again, you pull it out. Here's the document. It costs nothing to pull out a piece of paper that says, here's the policy, here's the procedure. It costs a little bit of money to write down what you're doing and formalize a procedure, but that'll help in the future. And then, industry collaboration itself, that's ongoing. That's why we have industry groups. That's why we try and create, organizations that can help to have companies work together to derive common goals and practices. So none of these, they're expensive, but a lot of the costs already been eaten by doing everything now. And so just document it, have it ready so that if it happens again, kind of the trigger to pull, right? Like, what is it we're gonna do? Okay, it's happened, let's just do it, right? So, yeah.
We need to get moving on to the next two. Maybe we'll have some more time to talk about it at the end. Thank you, Mark. Okay, I think is this one gonna be live or a video? This one's a video. Okay, so who we got here? We got Miyoung Jeong from University of South Carolina, and the title of her presentation is DMOs and Community Resilience During the COVID-19 Pandemic. So.
Hello, great to see you all. I'm Mindy Myunghee, Professor of Management at Salem State University in Salem, Mass. It's a great pleasure to have an opportunity to present our paper on behalf of our research team, including Drs. Miyoung Jeong, Ellie Lee, and Hyejo Shin. The title of our paper is DMOs and Community Resilience During the COVID-19 Pandemic. This study explored the effects of crisis severity on the relationships among DMOs' roles, adaptive responses, and community resilience. This study confirmed the importance of DMOs' roles, which emphasized how DMOs served as a collaborating party among stakeholders in a destination. For the introduction, I want to briefly discuss the study purposes and research questions. Reviewing DMO's traditional but crucial roles during the COVID-19 pandemic, the study attempted to identify how DMOs responded to their business challenges and crises caused by pandemic and what efforts they have made to be resilient as a community advocate. More specifically, the study strives to answer questions. What are the main roles of DMOs during the COVID-19 pandemic? How have DMOs responded to the COVID-19 pandemic to gain resilience? And have DMOs played different roles during the pandemic depending on the severity of the COVID-19 cases? Traditionally, DMOs have carried diverse roles to sustain the community vitality and the well-being of residents and visitors. Due to the uncertainty of the tourism activities globally caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, DMOs have been facing an extremely challenging time to generate tourism demand from international markets. Therefore, instead of focusing on external marketing efforts, DMOs have shifted their immediate attention to protecting community residents and businesses through close collaborations with the local, state, and federal governments, preparing to recover a local economy post-COVID-19. Based on the semi-constructed interview with DMO CEOs, primary roles were found in 4 major categories, including marketing efforts, communication efforts, support for local tourism, and responsibilities for responding to crisis. Crisis responsibility explains how much the tourism organizations assures the safety of tourists and local businesses when responding to the crisis. Adaptive response explains DMO's collaboration effort with key stakeholders such as the government and residents in the community. Resilience refers to the persistence of a system and the ability to observe disturbances to maintain the system. While adaptive response establishes a system that adapts to new environments, resilience is emphasized as a means to recover from disturbances. The adaptive response also can be considered as the mechanism for resilience. Therefore, the capability of a DMO's adaptive responses seems to be helpful to better prepare for the unexpected crisis, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, which in turn increases community resilience. Based on the semi-construct interviews and relevant prior research, the study speculated the following hypothesis to examine the effect of DMO's main roles on DMO's adaptive responses to the pandemic and the community resilience. These are 5 hypotheses speculated accordingly. To construct a survey instrument, a semi-structured online interview was conducted with CEOs of DMOs. 12 CEOs out of 110 DMOs participated in the interview. The interviews identified 4 major roles and responsibilities of DMO during the COVID-19 pandemic. The survey questionnaire included respondents' background, questions about the roles and responsibilities of DMOs, adaptive responses, and community resilience. The self-administered online survey was conducted from March to May 2021. After the first invitation email was sent to 590 DMOs professionals, 3 follow-up reminders were sent to increase the response rate. After the data was collected, the U.S. population and the U.S. COVID death count as of May 19, 2021 were added using the source from Census Bureau and CDC. Using PLS-SEM, a 2-step approach was adopted to analyze the data. For multi-group analysis, the data set was divided into 2 groups, severe versus less severe of the COVID-19 mortality rate. A total of 127 complete responses were collected, representing 105 DMOs in the U.S., which was a 22% response rate. About 53% of the respondents were female. About 74% of the respondents were 45 years or older. Almost a half of respondents were CEO or president of the DMO. 58% of the respondents were in their current position less than 5 years. The respondents also mentioned challenges they faced while carrying out responsibilities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Among answers of variety, the frequently iterated items include: visitors refuse to wear a face covering while they wander around the attractions and the street in the destinations. Resistance and/or protest against lockdown in some tourism destinations, and so on. The standardized factor loadings were equal to or greater than 0.70, except for 1 item for marketing and 1 item for support. Internal consistency and validities were checked and found met criteria to proceed on further analysis. Table 1 exhibits the results of hypothesis testing. Among 4 predictors of DMO's responses to COVID-19, communication only indicated a significantly positive impact supporting hypothesis 2. However, marketing efforts, support, and crisis responsibility showed no significant impact on DMO's response. DMO's response to the COVID-19 pandemic positively influenced resilience, supporting hypothesis 5. As seen in Table 2, a multi-group analysis indicated significant differences between severe and less severe destinations. As SEM results showed, crisis responsibility on response to the pandemic showed a significant difference for severe destinations only, as well as a response on community resilience. Communication appeared to be a significant predictor of DMO's responses to the pandemic in both severe and less severe areas. Supporting hypothesis 2 implied that communication efforts were perceived as the essential role of DMOs in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Although hypothesis 1, 3, and 4 were not supported, the mean scores of marketing support and crisis responsibility constructs were comparably high, mostly between 4.9 and 6.5, which were meaningful. It implied that communications outweighed other vital roles of DMOs, particularly under the pandemic situation. Supporting hypothesis 5 indicated that DMO's adaptive responses positively affected community resilience. During the pandemic, DMOs seemed to demonstrate a strong community leadership, listening to the residents and local business partners, which resulted in a sense of pride among the community members. A multi-group analysis detected significant differences of all hypothesized relationships between severe and less severe areas with the COVID-19 related statistics, except for communications. Regardless of the severity of the COVID-19 confirmed cases and the mortality rate, communication was perceived a critical role of DMOs to respond to the pandemic across the U.S. This study expanded the current DMO literature. DMOs play crucial roles in sustaining the local tourism businesses and developing effective crisis management strategies. However, scant research has explored the roles of DMOs in the crisis situation. Different from prior research that conceptually explained the DMO's roles in crisis management, this study empirically explored the effects of DMO's roles on their adaptive responses and resilience. Thus, this study will contribute to the literature with findings of how DMOs react to sustain community resilience during and post-pandemic era in the context of crisis-sensitive tourism and hospitality. This study took an empirical approach to validate the theoretical foundation of research on resilience. The findings of this study imply that the DMO is a key community advocate to protect residents' well-being and business vitality, particularly under a critical situation like the COVID-19 pandemic. DMOs must continue to emphasize an effective communication with all stakeholders in the destination. Crisis responsibility and DMOs' adaptive responses appeared crucial and need to be emphasized during the pandemic and post-pandemic in destinations. The findings of the study do not fully reflect what all DMOs in the US reacted to the COVID-19 pandemic, which results in lack of generalizability of the study's findings. This study only conducted the survey with DMO professionals, but resident and local business owners in the community may have different perceptions toward DMOs. Thus, future research is highly recommended to examine and evaluate the stakeholders' perspectives on how DMOs do for their community. These are selected references for this paper. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is the presenter live on Zoom, or we can pull up their face and ask them questions? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jeon. I'll take questions now. We got about 5 minutes here. You can, I guess if you have a question, probably should just come up and ask it from the microphone. So I'll stand over here in the corner.
Thank you, Dr. Jeong, for your presentation. That was kind of interesting presentations. I have a couple of questions. Can you share some measurement item did you use to measure the response and resilience, particularly because, as long as I know, if I'm wrong, to correct me, the DMO's major role is promotion, marketing, sales. But all of a sudden, your study focusing on community resilience. Community exists for resident, but they're not the one working for resident, they're working for tourists coming. So I'm not sure how their efforts are related to this community resilience. So if we can show and share your response and resilience measurement, we make a better guess what do you mean by supporting or advocating the community resilience?
I think it was adaptive response. I think the measurement's adaptive response. But I'm not sure what it is.
We can't hear you. Yeah, we can see you.
You're muted.
Yeah, we can't hear you. No. It might be your microphone. Now you're muted. But it might be your microphone input. You could also type your response in the chat if the microphone's not working.
Or if you can share your measurement on screen.
Just one sec, please. Let me.
We can hear you now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you? Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for your wonderful question. Yeah, before I share the measurement items, I just want to make sure that my message was clearly delivered, because as the Dr. Choi, right? Dr. Choi, who asked the question, clearly understand the key roles of DMOs. As we all know, DMOs' major roles and responsibilities are promoting the destinations, tourism, and local businesses related to the hospitality. But because of the COVID-19, the tourism has been all stalled, and it is very much slowed down. And we were wondering what are the DMOs are going to do during this time of specific time. No tourists are coming because of the lockdown, and many residents will be making visitation to museums or any other related hospitality organizations in the destination. So we wanted to find out what are DMOs doing. So because of this unprecedented situation happened, DMOs had to shift their major roles quickly from focusing on marketing and promoting their local hospitality and tourism. But meanwhile, they wanted to make sure to be a linking pin between the government agencies and local residents in order to convey some important information to the residents and visitors, even though the visitors are very small, but still they want, there are sporadically visitors are coming to the destination, and DMOs were still try to attempt to taking care of those incoming visitors as well. So understanding the shift of DMO's key roles during the COVID-19 pandemic, I want to share the items that we were using, particularly, so based upon the previous research, we adapted 4 questions. So the first one was, there is a sense of pride among people in my community. Another question was, my DMO listens to the residents and local business partners.
Could you share your screen so we can see the?
Oh, sure. So let me use my share screen function. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so here, particularly resilience. Yeah, there are 3 questions. Yeah, I'm sorry. Did I mention there were 4 questions? Actually, there were 3 questions. The last one was, my DMO has strong community leadership. So these were the measurement items that we used, which were adopted from previous research literature that was studying about resilience. So particularly during this pandemic situation, DMO's key roles were unintentionally shifted to more focused on building community resilience to prepare for the post-COVID. So I'm not sure whether my question was adequately answered to the, my answer was adequately addressed the question. Is there any other?
We got about 3 minutes before we need to go.
I have one more question.
Come on up. I don't think she can hear you.
I pretty much understanding that even at the conference, that's in Canada, many DMO in Canada, they said, we're now moving toward the helping community. And they more focusing destination development than promoting this destination. In doing that, I'm not really quite sure, maybe Stacia is know more than I do about this. When you change your major role, they need to change the mandate, because they always have a support from government or local chamber. So then they need to have a clear the role. So if they change this, these things during the pandemic, was this supported by their income source organization like Chamber of Commerce or government? Or just that's just kind of instant only temporary the action made by the DMO? Because this is not their traditional roles. Even our DTR Canada chapter, when we change a bit of things and everyone should get the everyone should be approved this. So this is kind of very important in North America. That's my last question.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. I totally understand where you're from. Yeah, as I mentioned before, the DMO's main roles are primarily focused on marketing and promoting of local hospitality businesses and tourism businesses. Yes, during COVID-19, the DMOs were forced to change their role temporarily. I mean, this is not the permanent role change. So as we all know, DMOs are supported by membership of the local community and also state government funding, I believe. So they are not supposed to change their role permanently without any consensus among stakeholders. So we are not talking about their roles were completely and permanently changed, but how instantaneously and how promptly DMOs were acting quickly in order to respond this unprecedented incident to protect their community and businesses and the entire community at large. So that's what we are focusing on. That's why we are more focused on building community resilience, because DMOs need to prepare for post-pandemic as well. They are not only focused on during the pandemic situation. So
We're gonna have
hopefully,
to
yeah.
kind of running out of time here, and I want to make sure we have enough time for our last person. But if we have any more time left, we can continue this. So let's go to our last presenter in the session. It's Lina Xiong from Colorado State University. And the topic is, how do travelers go back to COVID hit destinations? Is this a live presentation or another video? Okay, here we go.
Okay, so everyone, good morning. I hope I'm catching my time so everybody can go to have lunch. Yes. So our titles is on how do travelers go back to the previous epicenter. So the research questions is focused on the whether the travelers will come back to the previous epicenter, and whether the previous epicenter, such as Wuhan, has some kind of social stigma. And if has some kind of social stigma, whether it has some kind of difference with the demographic and geography traits. So we can see before the pandemic, we can see tourism, the leisure tourism is highly connected with the exploration motivation. But we think after pandemic, we should have some kind of the paradigm shift. Yeah, you see how we view destination and how we make the travel decisions. And also can see most of the research before the pandemic is with the survey or with the experiment to collect data and to do some kind of theoretical framework research. But we suggest after pandemic, maybe you can use evolutionary psychology theory to do this kind of research. So in our research, we have the three hypotheses. First is we focus on the evolutionary psychology theory. The definition is meaning all the motivations, all the people's motivations are the products of long line of our ancestors' decision and behaviors to increase the survival and reproductive success. So that now we are the offspring of our ancestors. So now all behaviors, yes, the people have different characteristics, such as in-group or out-group, our gender, our age. Yeah, we can behave differently with the same motivations. So if we focus on the pandemics, the context, we will find our tourists. We will have the different behaviors. Yeah, we have different psychological traits, such as the first day we can say is paragon avoidance of the self-protection, this kind of motivations. Yeah, it causes our below behaviors. The first is we can say is the disease avoidance or trip avoidance. You know, now is the third year we had outbreak the COVID-19. Have still many people is eager to stay home to keep social distance and refuse to go outside to go for trip. So also we have some kind of epicenter stigma. Everybody know, yeah, in the first 2020, the identified COVID-19 in Wuhan. So Wuhan and Wuhan people has significantly discriminated by others. And all the people take the trip avoidance to Wuhan, yes. And also another very important, the psychology, the traits is ethnocentrism and xenophobia. That is mainly in the pandemic. Most of people, they prefer to take the domestic trade. They prefer to take local food. They prefer the local, the countries, the brand. Yes, and in the meantime, yes, at the same time, the people dislike the foreigners and dislike foreigners' destinations. Yes. So based on this kind of the previous research, we deliver three the hypotheses. The first hypothesis is we focus on gender, the gender difference. According to the previous research, we found when we happen the disaster, when we confront the disasters, if the mate acquisition motivation be triggered, the men would like to take the risk-taking behaviors than female. So we get the hypothesis 1, after pandemic, the men were generally more likely to return earlier than women. And hypothesis 2 is about age difference. Everybody knows the COVID-19 is more vulnerable to the senior person, to the old age persons. So our hypothesis 2 is that young people were generally more likely to return earlier than old people, because old people is more likely to trigger, to activate with the immune system, yes, to get away with the disease threat. So our the hypothesis 3 is about distance to the previous epicenter. Because we know from the psychology theory, we have the in-group and out-group. And from the social stigma, we think, yes, the outside people, yes, don't like to contact with the previous epicenter. And especially if your labor area, if your labor country or your labor area to the previous epicenter, the labor area will expose with higher the disease threat. So our hypothesis 3 is after pandemic, the travelers from the further away are likely to return earlier than people who live closer. So the study case is with Wuhan and Hubei, is central part of China, and we choose the Hunan as the benchmark. Yeah, it's the labor province. And our research used the mixed approach. Yeah, study 1 is the primary research, used our C-trip stale data. And we are the second, the study B as the interpretation to explain why, yeah, the mechanism of study 1. So first we can see the big timeline in Hubei, in Wuhan in 2020. Yes, we have some very key, the time points. The first is from the January 23 to the April 7. Yes, that is the Wuhan's lockdown. That is really very crazy. Yes, it's more than 10 million people have to stay in home. Yes, because the COVID-19 outbreak. And the second time is April 1st, is in Hubei, except Wuhan. Yes, our tourism is reopened. Yeah, everything is reopened. Yeah. And then another important timeline is from the April 19 to July 30. That is the Wuhan local government to launch the 50 million the free coupons, including the 100 million the free coupon to the local restaurant, to local attractions, to help the local tourism to recover. Another very important timeline is 2020 from the August 8 to December 31. Yeah, that is the Wuhan and Hubei government to launch the free admission policy to all the attractions in Hubei, to all the peoples. Yeah, please come to Wuhan and Hubei to travel to help the local economy to recover. So we can see the big peak, big recovery at this time. Another very important, the last very important timeline is because Wuhan is very special. It's one of the biggest on-campus city of the world. In Wuhan, there are more than 1.2 million students studying in Wuhan. But because the COVID-19 outbreak is early in 2020, so all the students is not permitted to come back to Wuhan. So until the September and mid-October, all students, 1.2 million on-campus students, yes, they're permitted. They come back to campus, but they have to stay in campus because the quarantine, the partial contacts, yes. So that is our research design. Yes, we use the C-Trip. Yeah, C-Trip is one of the biggest online travel agency in all the world. And also we use the long interview to see what kind of mechanism, why people choose to travel back to Wuhan or they don't travel back to Wuhan. So we can see our final finding. So first we focus on gender. Yeah, we focus on gender. We can see, from the April to July. Yes, first I have short introduction about how we do the data analysis. Yes, you can see we use the C-Trip data. So we every month have divided the data points. So first, for example, the first day of the month to the 10th day, collected one data point. So every month have 3 data points. So from the April to July, we have altogether 12 data points. So we can collect it with the male recovery percentage and the female recovery percentage compare the same age before the pandemic. It's 2019. So we can find a big difference between the male and the female. Yes, but if we compare with the benchmark, it's not have so big difference. And also we use the t-test. We use the t-test. We find Hubei and Pasteur. Yes, from the statistics has the significant. And also we found have 2 big difference between the male and female. One is the end of April. Another time is the end of May. We combined with the long interview. We found, yes, the first peak is because the Wuhan government launched the free coupons to all the local residents. Please go to the restaurant to eat. Please go to attraction to travel. So we found the mayor, yes, to recover faster. And the second time is the end of May and it's early of June with big difference. We combine with long interview, found it is because at the early of June, the Wuhan government to hold the press conference to tell the result with all the local residents with the COVID-19 the acid test with the 0 confirmed case. So Wuhan is local government say Wuhan is safe. So we find the mayor recover faster. Yes. And if we focus on the age, yes, we found some surprise. Yes, surprise result. From our hypothesis, we think the young people, from the 18 to 24, the young people usually is bachelor, don't get married. Yes, they should recover faster. But unfortunately, we found only in the first month in April, the young people is recovered, the bounced fastest. But later, most of time is their family can see is aged from 25 to 50. The young and middle ages group, bounced fastest. And if we see the benchmark, no, no difference. Yes, 3 groups. No, we can't see any kind of trends. And we don't pass the statistics. Yes, the test. So we combine with the long interview. We find maybe is a problem. Possible reason is because Wuhan is have 1.2 million the campus students, but because COVID-19, the 1.2 million student is not permitted to come back to Wuhan. So we find, so maybe that is the reason. So the young people don't recover fasting. And finally, we focus on the distance to the previous epicenter. We divided all the visitors, into 3 groups. First group is the distance from the Hubei and Wuhan, place, and the labor province, from the labor province, and others from the farthest the province. We can see in Wuhan also have big difference. Yes, from the common sense, yes, this the local, will recover the fastest, but unsurprisingly, the labor province to recover slowest. So we think, yes, maybe it's the local area. During the pandemic, they exposed with higher risk, the disease risk. So after pandemic, the labor area still refuse to travel back to the previous epicenter. So anyway, we see the benchmark, don't have this kind of trend. And also we use the Avoda test and LSD test. We find the Hubei, the Hubei significantly, the local residents, local market recover faster than others, and others is bigger than labor province. But for the benchmark, Hunan is only the local market is faster. For the labor and others, no difference. So that is the table with our long interviews may result. So I want to say something why we use the long interview, because everybody know if we do the survey with the pandemics, with some kind of challenging problem, just like ask do you discriminate with the Wuhan, do you discriminate with the, how to say, there's some kind of game of this kind of challenging problems. People refuse, don't want to tell the real thought. So if we do the traditional survey, we can't get a real answer. And the second reason is because mostly our decision is decided by subconscious. So we can't ask them why you choose to travel to Wuhan, or why you don't travel to Wuhan. That people don't know why they make this choice. They will tell you some kind of plausible reasons. Yes, that is not reasons. So we use the long interview. Is we take the 2 hours interview. We go to the sample's house of the workplace to see where they work, where they study, and all of their 3 years, the trip, their behavior. We from their behavior to see what kind of motivation to trigger them makes this kind of behavior. So that is why we use the long interview to do the second study.
We're starting to run out of time, and I want to save some time for maybe a question or two.
Okay. So almost done. Yes. So yes, thank you. Then welcome everybody. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Maybe 1 or 2 quick questions. Anybody got any questions? $1.2 million students. What is that like in one town? We had about 40,000. I thought that was a lot. Any questions at all? Okay. Hello. Well, we're butting up to lunch right now. So thank you all for all the presenters, and thank you for the work you've done, and thank you.